worship pastor here. This is Nathan.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Nathan. I'm an admin assistant. I intern for church basically, and I do worship.
And he's an absolute legend.
Debatable, yes. Okay, Ross,
You want to take this
cool,
one?
yeah, go for it, yeah. Yeah, worship is way bigger than a Sunday. It's like, ultimately, it breaks down to worthship. So Jesus is worthy. He has so much worth, and we show him his worth. He is worthy of our praise, and we say how great he is and how much we love him and how much we understand who he is and how great that is. But that does include singing, and it includes like the way we do church on Sunday. That is all worship. It's all making Jesus and God look amazing. So never mind. But that also applies to all of our lives. There's a whole thing about like Romans 12 verse 1. By the mercies of God, offer your bodies, your lives, your everyday lives, to God as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. So that means the way we choose to live, the way we choose to, the choices we make, the way we speak, the way we act, all of our day-to-day lives comes from a place of we understand that Jesus is amazing and Jesus is Lord. So then we're talking about song worship and how we express that through the words and the melodies we sing, and through I think it's is this 1 Timothy 3:16? It's a 3:16. Maybe Galatians. Actually, Galatians 3:16.
We're going to fact check that.
It might have to do that. Yeah. It's a 3:16. I know that. Yeah, teaching and admonishing another with psalms, and singing and making melody on your hearts. Singing, we sing and we sing the truth of the words we sing, and we make melody on our hearts. And so our emotions and the way we understand our thoughts, that all glorifies God, and God sees that and he accepts it, and he's delighted, he loves it. So that's what we sing, that's why we enter times of worship together.
Yeah, I think that a huge part of it is turning our hearts to him, reordering our hearts, and I think that the way we were created, that a powerful way to do that is through song worship. And I think that we joining in one voice with others in the same room is a powerful way of joining in the same heart cry, the same cry of worship.
Yeah.
So it has power beyond or in a different way to other areas of worship in our lives, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think in my experience anyway, we're not always coming to small group with our hearts and our minds in the right kind of ordered way, with him being our first priority. And I think that worshipping together is a really good way of resetting those priorities, resetting that expectation. So although it's not, I wouldn't say you can't have small group without worship, but I think it's a very powerful aspect. So if you can, then it's a great way to unify as a group under one desire, and that's to worship him with our lives.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like this movement that we're part of in Vineyard Churches, it started from someone's house, a bunch of people crammed in a house, singing songs together, and that is what kind of birthed this movement.
I think that it's always going to be tricky when you've got a new small group, a new group of people that don't know each other, because I think to be vulnerable in worship is a courageous thing to do, and so that's obviously more difficult when you don't know the people in the room. my advice to leaders would be, you have to be the ones that lead that. If you want your small group to be going after extravagant, vulnerable worship, you have to be doing that from the word go. So even if you're not the one leading the worship, you have to model that and lead through your actions.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think you can also address the fact that it's different. The context is different. It's weird to hear other people's voices, hear your own voice. Often in big Sunday services or conferences, you can't even hear your own voice, so it's less embarrassing. But I think you can address that and just say, hey, look, we recognise it's weird and awkward. We're going to push through that, and because there's a reason we're pushing through it. We're not pushing through it as this difficult thing to do because we're told we should worship. It's because we want to lift him high and turn our hearts to him.
Yeah, and the scripture says, make a joyful noise to the Lord, not an amazing noise to the Lord. So that's an encouragement.
Yeah. No one's recording it, right? So
Hopefully.
yeah. I think that if you can hold a tune, you can lead song worship. You don't need to be able to play an instrument. Most of the worship that I've been involved in small groups has been a cappella, in my context. And so at that point, I would say there probably needs to be a very good reason why you as a leader of a small group isn't. You should be able to just lead a song. And I suppose I set that to you as a challenge, as if you're not willing to do it, why would you expect someone else to be willing to do it? And it can be really embarrassing, particularly if you don't think your voice is very good. But we're called to offer what we have, and so that would be my response. I think obviously you can decide to put some actual worship music on and just lead the singing along to that, but I would say you can't do that as that's not a substitute for leading the room. I think if you use a worship track from any kind of recorded worship, you still need to be on leading people to sing along to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a great question.
Not that I have any experience in this at all, but I imagine the first thing you do is have a conversation with them and say, I see this in you. And this is also a really important thing because everyone's preconception of worship is, oh, you want me on stage, you got me in, on church on Sunday. And that's not necessarily the thing. Not everyone is called to that, but we're all called to worship, and some people are called to worship in smaller contexts. And some people are better at that than they will be on stage. Some people who are on stage probably couldn't do that so well. So if they see someone like that, you can say, look, I see this in you, I'm not putting pressure on you. Would you feel free? Would you be able to step out into this? Could you consider this and pray about it? Because it could be big. A lot of people find stepping into leadership is a bit daunting. And so you need to know that you're on their side, and that so when they start to step up, if they accept, then they're ready to lead, and that you as a leader pretty much have to be their cheerleader probably the most of the time. And so when it says, let's begin the song, and you're like, yes, let's sing the song. So it's probably the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think if we get to that point where they're then stepping out and doing that, I think it's really important that you are really engaged with what they're trying to do and basically be their safety net. So even if what they do, they make some mistakes, or there's just not a great choice of set or songs or moments of quiet, whatever, you're just fully behind them in what they're doing and trying to make what they're doing work. So singing loudly, being super engaged with what they're doing. If they open it up to the room to kind of pray out, jump straight in with that, you're there to make a success of what they're trying to do, and you can afterwards feedback if things didn't work so well. But I would say that, if you will have noticed from some context that you feel like they're carrying something. So whether that's because you've been leading worship in small group, or you've all been singing along to a track, and then you're realizing actually they're carrying something. I think it's important to call out specific things you see in them, but then give them a small step to make. Not, hey, will you be our worship leader for small group? This is like, hey, like in a couple of weeks' time, would you be up for taking a lead just this once and seeing how it goes? I think it has to be achievable, and then baby steps, and depending on how up for it and how confident they are, as you would in any context for raising people up.
Absolutely.
It's a very tricky question. Great question. I think it's important we address these questions because they happen. I think there's two parts to that. Either they've been doing it and you feel like, look, like you might have a great voice, but you're like, it doesn't seem like you're like the leading of worship is what's either your gifting or you have like your ability right now. So I think there's, if they're musically great, and then it's a question of, oh, we need to train you up in worship leading. That's one thing, and I think that having that frank conversation is great. If it's a question they got super heart for leading worship, but say for example vocally they're just not able to like hold the tune for people, and then I think it's a question of important to recognize and commend their heart for worshipping and worship leading and leading people into that place. And if that genuinely is their heart, then the next thing you say, which will be around, hey, I feel like actually when you're leading it's more difficult for people to engage because you struggle with your voice, and that can be quite distracting. If their heart is that people are engaging, their heart is that it's for worship, I would hope that they would take that quite well. And I think it's important to never close the door entirely. You can say, hey, look, if you want to go and get singing lessons, or like really practice, that it's not an absolute no. I mean, sometimes it's clear to musical people when somebody is unlikely to ever be able to reach a certain level of musical ability, but I think that if somebody wants to try to see what their absolute like limit is in terms of what they can achieve with their voice or with their instrument, like all credit to them.
I think you're kind of in you can easily become a conflict sort of situation when someone, this is my dream to do worship, and you're saying probably not the best choice. But the important thing in that conversation is to make sure that they know that you are for them and that you care about them. And in fact, in your motivation is actually to protect them, because the trouble is if it just sort of, if it carries on and it's difficult for people to worship, then it can begin to get nasty comments get said behind people's backs. Oh, they're not actually that good. Why are they even there? This is a bit rubbish. And then that negatively affects the person in ways that they weren't expecting, and to allow that situation to happen is actually dangerous for the actual small group and community itself. So
because you want to be protecting them as well. It's not necessary. Obviously sometimes avoiding the conversation is actually really it's not fair on that person. I think that's a really, really good point. Also, often you can have a sense of like, oh, this is what I feel called to do, and yes, we are all called to worship. We're not necessarily all called to lead worship and be worship leaders. However, we are all called to lead with our lives and lead a worshipful life and lead others by an example, right? So I think that it's not as clear cut as either you're a worship leader or you're not. I think that it's which spheres you're called to be leading worship. Even if you can't sing at all, you can still be leading people in worship by the way you worship wholeheartedly in the congregation or in the room, in small group. So I'd say commend that. It doesn't have to be the person at the front directing the song that is the only person that's modelling and leading worship.
Yeah, because I imagine in moments when it's down, if someone were to open it to a room and someone who couldn't sing so well but had an absolute passion for the glory of God and for making him known and like just extolling his greatness, who would then pray out something that could just completely change the atmosphere of the entire room and probably do more work in 30 seconds than the entire worship's out at that point. It's an important thing that's the sung worship is an important part of it, but it doesn't just have to be that.
I think that it is in a way it's kind of like in Ephesians marriage, like the worship leader should be submitting to the authority of their worship of their small group leader, because that's their leader, that's the person who has asked them to lead in this thing that they are kind of ultimately responsible for. But at the same time, you as a small group leader want to be giving authority over to your worship leader to lead in the way the Holy Spirit's leading them. And it's that back and forth of trusting each other and releasing the worship leaders to do that. But that trust has to be formed first. I would expect to, if I had a new person leading worship in small group and I was the small group leader, I would expect to be able to, also useful for them to be able to give them kind of a clear directive of what is wanted, like a rough timings, and then if they immediately if you say, hey, we just want 5-10 minutes of worship just at the beginning because we want to center ourselves, set our hearts on him, and then you have to stop them at like an hour and a half, something's gone wrong in terms of like them understanding the vision for the evening and what wants to happen. And so it's a question of building up that trust and also making it, I think making it clear that this is what you expect of them and this is the realm that they have freedom to have authority over what they do. So
absolutely.